Well, maybe we should start, and we can just start by introducing ourselves and thank you for coming. Um, it's always nice to be able to talk with students and recent graduates in historic preservation about our work and also to give you information that may um, just help you through a civil service exam and or learn more about working at landmarks and hopefully have some interest in joining us. I am Kate Lemus McHale. I'm the Director of Research, and I'll let everyone else introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Corey Harala. I'm the Director of the Preservation Department.
I'm John Weiss. I'm the Deputy Counsel for the Commission.
I'm Stephanie Yang. I'm the Director of Human Resources Management and Operations.
All right, and so we're just going to kick off tonight with a brief kind of what we call an LPC 101 about the Commission's work and the different departments in the Commission and the kind of things that we do. And then Stephanie's going to talk about the civil service exam, which is being offered right now and is an opportunity to get on our list of qualified applicants. So first is, what is the Landmarks Preservation Commission? We are the largest municipal preservation commission in the country. We were established in 1965. It's a mayoral agency, and so we are part of the city of New York, and the commission itself is 11 commissioners, 10 of whom are volunteer, and we're led by our chair, who is our boss, Sarah Carroll, who runs the commission. And then we are a staff of, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is an image of a public hearing. And so the commissioners meet not every Tuesday, but a lot of Tuesdays to review applications for work on landmark buildings. The commission votes to designate landmarks, and a staff of about 80 people works for the agency in all of the various ways that we engage with historic buildings in the city. And so our two largest departments are the Preservation Department that reviews applications for work on landmarks or buildings within historic districts. We also have a research department which surveys buildings around the city, surveys neighborhoods, looks at potential historic districts, evaluates the significance of buildings, writes designation reports. And we have a small archaeology department that works with archaeological resources throughout the city. We have an environmental review department, so that gets involved with larger planning and construction projects where we identify historic resources that may be impacted by them. We also have an enforcement department that John is the head of, and we'll talk with you about this evening, and a small grants program where we can give grants to people working on historic landmarks. We are guided by an equity framework that really guides all of our work, and for example, focuses us on diversity and inclusion in our landmarks designations, so that our landmarks are reflecting the diversity of the city and really telling the story of all New Yorkers. It helps us to ensure effective outreach for our regulatory work and in how we talk with property owners to gain their support for designation. It also, of course, we're guided by fairness, transparency, and efficiency in our regulations. And so the current number of buildings and sites that are designated throughout the city is just under 38,000. So this is buildings that are individual landmarks, buildings within the city's 156 historic districts, and some interior landmarks that are public spaces that are architecturally significant, and scenic landmarks, which are city-owned, mostly parks that are significant as scenic landmarks. And then you can kind of see the breakdown throughout the city of where these are. Brooklyn and Manhattan have the most, and we, then our outer boroughs, we are working as part of the equity framework to identify more landmarks in areas that are less well represented by designations. And then, as I mentioned, equity is a really important guiding force for our designations. And so that really helps us prioritize buildings that represent a community, African American history, LGBTQ history, Latinx history, and culture, and that really reflect the city's diversity. We all are also looking at the geographic diversity in our designations. We're really telling the true story and acknowledging, some difficult histories in designations. Our research is, we try to be very inclusive, and again, to tell the story of all New Yorkers as much as we can through that work. Some of our recent designations are on this slide. The Bronx Opera House has really important Latino history, cultural significance as a Latin music venue in the 60s and 70s in the Bronx. Julius's Bar is an incredibly significant place of LGBTQ civil rights history. And then the former Colored School number 4 in Manhattan is the only surviving former colored school in Manhattan that served African-American students while the public school system was segregated in the 19th century. So our designations recognize architectural significance, cultural significance, in many cases, layers of both. Historic districts, we're trying to work throughout the city. Some recent designations are the Linden Street District in Bushwick, which is the first historic district in that neighborhood. The Melrose Parkside Historic District in Flatbush in Brooklyn. 2 districts in Cambria Heights, that is the first out in that part of southeastern Queens, and a great historic district in Harlem that really recognizes its cultural significance, in particular during the Harlem Renaissance. So with that, I will turn it over to Corey.
Thanks, Kate. So I really wanted to talk obviously about the work of the Preservation Department, and you can see what you can see up on the slide, but first I want to take a quick detour just to give you a little bit of more in-depth information about how the department is composed and what we do. So the Preservation Department consists of a staff of almost 30 preservationists. There are also 6 deputy directors and me as the director. And all of us have historic preservation degrees or degrees in allied fields like architecture or some historic preservation training and or experience. We definitely have the largest preservation department in the country, hands down. And really that's great because it facilitates a lot of interaction with colleagues with various levels of experience and also a variety of interests. So every day our preservationists on staff review architectural drawings, specs, building material samples. They draft permits, issue permits, they conduct site visits all throughout New York City. And this means many types of different buildings, districts, and sites. And they work closely with all of our diverse applicants. This could be homeowners, architects, preservation consultants, etc. There are also opportunities for our staff to handle special desks, things like historic theaters, maybe working with other city agencies or something more technical like solar panels. And also many opportunities to participate in outreach and other special projects. And we do internally support continuing education opportunities that benefit the preservationists themselves and our entire staff. All right, so back to the slide. As Kate sort of set up for me here, after historic districts and individual landmarks are designated, the Preservation Department reviews applications for proposed work on those properties and issues the permits. In other words, we regulate. I'll touch on a few key points that you see on this slide, but otherwise I'm going to try to stay out of the weeds. I have prettier pictures to look at coming up, so don't worry. But just for starters, designation, one sort of fundamental thing you should know, designation doesn't compel owners to do work. Instead, they come to us with their proposals, And through our regulatory process, we work with them to meet their goals or their needs, while of course at the same time ensuring that the work protects the historic character of the building and the historic district. In historic districts, we are primarily interested in work that impacts the exterior of the building. Most importantly, street-facing front facades and other portions of a building or site that are visible from public thoroughfares, streets, sidewalks, parks, things like that. But we do also regulate the sides and rear of buildings, as well as rooftops, even when you can't see them from any of those places. Our regulation begins with the appearance and condition of the building at the time of designation, and that is the basis for us issuing all future permits. And then just a little bit of factual stuff. A huge number of our applications, 95%, these are reviewed and approved by our staff pursuant to our rules that authorize the staff to make those types of determinations. The other 5% go through a different public hearing process. And we currently receive about 12,000 applications a year, so we stay very busy. Next. So I'm going to quickly show you some overarching themes and categories of work that the Preservation Department and therefore the Commission reviews and approves. Restoration is, of course, a very enjoyable one for all of us. Most of this type of work, this is things like making repairs, restoring windows and doors, just cleaning things up, bringing back missing features. Most of this is actually reviewed by the staff. Most of the staff site visits that I mentioned earlier, that stems from reviewing this type of work. You might issue a permit and then stipulate that you want to review the best brick match or the right mortar tooling or the proper stone patch. And those are things you'd write into your permit and then later review in the field. But all in all, this is a really great part of the job. Next. And perhaps surprising to some, but another important theme to us that we wanted to highlight is sustainability and resiliency. And this is something that's really expanded in recent years. The Commission does have a long track record of supporting these types of proposals, demonstrates that compatibility of historic preservation and sustainability goals, enables adaptations to historic buildings and sites. These are things that reduce carbon emissions, improve energy efficiency and resiliency, but importantly, don't compromise the historic integrity of the buildings and sites. And in the past few years, we've really worked hard to greatly expand those staff level rules that I mentioned to allow for things like visible solar panel installations, high performance windows like those used in passive house projects, and other various measures to accommodate things like highly energy efficient HVAC equipment, installing flood barriers in flood prone areas, and bioswales and planting beds in typical row house blocks, sidewalks. Next. Additions are another category that the Commission staff sees regularly. Most often, this is rear yard additions and rooftop additions on row house type buildings, but really it could be any type of an addition on any building type. These types of applications are usually reviewed by our commissioners at a public hearing, not done at staff level, but that is possible in some limited cases as well. But even if the Commission is reviewing it through that different public hearing process, the staff works hard on these applications to help the applicant get their presentations into shape and to formulate talking points. Factors like scale and massing, materials, design in relationship to the building, to a road, to the streetscape, all of these things are considered. We use the term appropriateness to help guide what might be an acceptable change. And it's a broad term that has many different ways to go about it. Visibility from the public way, public thoroughfare, like I mentioned before, that's also considered. And in many cases, at least some visibility for additions next to or above or in conjunction with the historic building is found to be appropriate. There's really no standard that additions can't be visible. So just a little background on that. Hopefully that was interesting. And as I mentioned, the staff really does work on these types of applications a lot, especially additions to row houses. All right, next slide. Similarly, we do review new building proposals, not infrequently in historic districts. These are always important projects. Architects that are working on these applications, they can take a variety of approaches when they design new buildings. It could be traditional, could be contemporary, could be something in between. But importantly, they have to consider the immediate context around the site and the larger context and character of the historic district. And those are the types of things, again, that they'd consider and that our commissioners would consider in making a potential approval. The preservation staff on these projects often gets the chance to discuss design approaches with the architect and the owner, can sometimes make suggestions based on their experience and knowledge of historic preservation principles, things like that. So many of the staff, especially those with architecture backgrounds, really find these projects to be rewarding. Next. And last but not least, adaptive use projects are also great. They tend to result in interesting, often cutting edge design approaches that breathe new life and introduce new uses into buildings that no longer serve their original purpose. These types of projects really are often a challenge to the staff. It, kind of makes everyone step out of their preservation comfort zone. But again, they can be very exciting to work on. So we do welcome these types of projects. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Corey. As I mentioned, I'm the deputy counsel, and as such, I oversee enforcement. And enforcement at the commission is all about our buildings. We do issue violations, we issue stop work orders, we issue warning letters, we have escrow accounts set up to ensure compliance with the law. But the bottom line is we really care about the buildings. And as such, the enforcement staff will often work closely with the preservation staff to come up with solutions when work is either done in non-compliance or without permit. That being said, some of the most sort of egregious types of violations we deal with are demolition by neglect cases, and that's a very tiny subset of our almost 38,000 designated structures. We have a handful of owners who, for whatever reason, don't take care of their landmarks. And this on the screen is an example of one, 135 Geralman Street, where under the landmarks law, when a landmark is either structurally compromised, it's not watertight, or it's at risk of losing its significant architectural features, we can bring a lawsuit in Supreme Court, and we're basically going before a judge, asking for a court order, ordering the owner to make repairs. And if they don't make repairs, we can seek fines as high as $5,000. Although sometimes the fines really don't do anything. We have one case in Brooklyn where we had a judge impose a $1,000 a week fine on an owner until he made repairs to his landmark building in Cobble Hill. Connection just dropped out. That was in Cobble Hill, and that was 9 years ago, and the owner's continuing to pay $1,000 a week, and he still has not repaired the building. So we're trying to up that and get him to make repairs. In the case of 135 Geralman Street, the owner wasn't making repairs. We went to court. He was an elderly gentleman. He would come to court with literally pieces of his building to show the judge, and he did have his day in court. And eventually he sold the building. It was completely restored and sold apparently to a goth musician from the West Coast, who's now living there happily. Next screen, please. Here's another example of not only demolition by neglect, but also a special permit project. So this is an individual landmark in Manhattan on East 4th Street, and it was surrounded by parking lots. So it's a prime development site. The owner was not making repairs. At one point, a neighbor in a nearby apartment house with a view of the roof of this building called us up and said, "Did you guys know the roof collapsed during last night's thunderstorm?" So we went out, we did a site visit. Yes, the roof had collapsed. The building was in terrible shape. We sued the owner. We had a trial actually in court with some of our staff testifying. We prevailed. He then transferred the property to a new owner who promptly did a complete restoration of the building. As you can see in the center image, it had some structural issues. And one option available to owners of landmarks is under the zoning resolution and our rules, you can get a special permit waiving certain zoning requirements. So use requirements can be waived, bulk requirements can be waived if you agree to restore your landmark building to a sound first-class condition, which is our highest level of restoration, and agree to maintain it in that condition for as long as you have that waiver. So in this case, this new owner decided to get a waiver for the new building. You see a little bit to the right of the historic building. That new building was on the same zoning lot. He got a waiver for that building. In exchange, he did do a complete restoration of the Skidmore house, and it came out terrific. So that's a very brief overview of what we do in enforcement.
Okay, great, thank you. And I will just go through a couple of other things that are sort of across the whole agency. But before I do that, Corey did a really nice job of talking more about what staff in the preservation department does. So I realized I skipped that in my earlier spiel and just wanted to talk about that a little bit more, which is in the research department research department staff are have backgrounds in historic preservation or architectural history primarily. We've had some architects, some historians. I'm the director and there's one deputy director, and altogether we're a group of, there's 12 LPs in the research department. And so tasks include survey work, looking at potential historic districts, research around the city's archival resources, online research, census records, deeds, real estate record and guide, all of the things I'm sure you're learning about to build the history of a neighborhood, the history of a building, really make a case for the significance of a building. And then research department staff present proposed landmarks to the commission to vote on them and write the designation reports. We also have a role in evaluating buildings or districts that are suggested by the public. We have a process called a request for evaluation that we're looking at that. And then we're also working with the environmental review group as well in terms of identifying potential historic resources. And then we do a lot of outreach also in different ways. There's groups of staff that may talk about financial benefits, our grants program. Staff are also involved in kind of work, being available to the public to ask questions. We do kind of interactive open house meetings on occasion. And we have a lot of information about how to file and get a permit that we share with people, and then also answer specific questions. And then we've been really working with our data over the past several years to really build up a robust data set of our historic buildings that's geo-referenced and geolocated. And we have a lot of tools that we use in our survey work, but also that's available to the public on our website in terms of finding a landmark, locating a landmark. All of our historic, our designation reports are available. We also have tools so people can look to see permit activity. And so you can see if you're walking down the street, some work happening on a building, you can check to see if that's being done under a permit. And then we also have lots of other initiatives and special projects that staff often is very involved with. We have a really cool archaeological repository that our archaeological staff work at. We have staff was deeply involved in creating our permit guidebook, for example. We have a business express service that's really kind of helping owners, business owners in landmark buildings get through a permit review process expeditiously. Again, our grants program, we have lots of technical resources, and that's something that staff really gets to do a lot, is to provide their technical experience and expertise with applicants, which is, I think, a meaningful part of that process. And then we've recently put our collection of designation photos, digitized those. And so we've made a collection of all of our designation photos on the website too. And then we've also just been trying to make the stories that landmarks tell more accessible and to connect them. Designation reports have been being written since the 60s, and there's different levels of depth that they've gone into, and they're also, regulatory documents at the end, even though they have incredible history. And so we've been developing story maps and other tools of really sharing more broadly and accessibly the history that's represented by New York City's landmarks. And staff is involved with all of those projects as well. So I will turn it over to Stephanie now.
Thank you, Kate. So now that you know a little bit more about LPC, I'm here to tell you a little bit about working for the city, working for LPC specifically. So one of the greatest things that I always tell people who we hire is we have a comprehensive benefits package, which includes zero premium healthcare, vision, dental, annual leave, about 3 weeks per year to start, but it increases with your service, competitive salary, also have or participate in the public service loan forgiveness program. And once it's fully established, telework for up to 2 days per week. This is something that's brand new to the city for now. And once the city policy is established, we'll be able to roll it out to our landmarks preservationists. And as Corey mentioned, there's also a whole lot of opportunities for training and professional development. Next slide. Civil service. So landmarks preservationist is a competitive title, which requires that candidates file for and pass the civil service examination. This examination is typically given once every 4 years and 2 to 4 years. And we typically move through the list pretty quickly. Next slide. This is a brief overview of what that process looks like. So candidates will file for the exam online, and it's a very short exam, meaning that it's basically an expanded resume. There is no question and answer, like you have to answer questions based on your knowledge. Not really. It's more like how much experience do you have? What kind of degree do you have? So everything that you need to know about it is in the notice of examination, which is published by the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. And I can probably put a link to that in the chat later. Once you file for the exam online, you go through the questions and you'll be able to get your score in minutes. And this is something that has improved over time. So once the filing period ends, which currently the filing period is from September 6th through the 26th, and once that filing period ends, the DCAS will then establish a list. And this takes a little bit of time, usually between 2 to 4 months. They look at how many people actually filed, and then all the passers, which is somebody who gets a score of 70 or above, will then be placed on the eligible list. And then once this eligible list is made public, everybody who filed for it will receive a list number. What the agency does, LPC would do then, is to certify a list and hire from there. And we will have to interview folks in the list number order. And once we appoint candidates, they serve a 12-month probation, then they become permanent. And that's how you get to become an LP in LPC. Next slide. So this is a screen grab of the qualification requirements. And basically, it's a master's degree in historic preservation, architectural history, art history, architecture, or American history, which you need to have by January 31st, 2024. Plus 1 year of full-time satisfactory experience working in the fields of preservation, restoration, or conservation of historic structures, or conducting research in architectural or art history, or working as an architect or architectural assistant, or teaching college level courses in historic preservation, architectural history, art history, architecture, or American history. The experience portion must be met by September 26, 2023. And there is a way of meeting the qualification requirements. Sorry. 1 second. And there is a way of meeting the qualification requirements with a baccalaureate degree in historic preservation, architectural history, art history, architecture, or American history. You would just need 2 years of satisfactory experience, as I described before. Next slide. So hopefully this piqued your interest and you want to apply now, today. You can review I actually have this in the slide, but I will share this. And you can have a link to the notice of examination and a link to the online application system, which is also called OASIS. There is an application fee of $68. And basically you enter your degree experience and you get a score. So file the application today. I think this is the end. Next slide. So we can take any questions that you might have. If you want to put it into the Q&A section, that's fine too.
I think what we might do, because what you can do is raise your hand and then you can ask a question, or feel free to just put it in the Q&A. And if people want, we can also just bring people in. This was set up as a webinar, but I think we're kind of a small group, so I can just bring people in if we want to just kind of talk a little more informally with questions. But why don't we start with, if people have questions, to please raise your hand or put it in the Q&A. And to raise your hand, it's like a hand raise option. What do we think? Should we just bring everyone in and then it's a little less daunting?
Yeah, I think we could bring everybody in.
Okay. All right, so I'll invite you to come in, and if you would like to, just come on in. It seems like okay, some people may not want to come in, which is fine. But if anyone does have a question, just feel free to turn on your mic and ask.
Hi. I have a question.
Hi.
My name's Drew Citron. How are you?
Good.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I am curious if it's worth it to take the exam when I'm not going to be graduating for another year and a half, just to get on the list. Can you speak to that?
I can answer that question. So because the education piece needs to be attained by January 31st, 2024, you should not file for this exam, but you should look out for the next one.
Stephanie, is there any clarification to those who may have already have a qualifying degree that may be different than the preservation degree, where they could actually apply because they qualify on the first like let's say they have an architecture degree already. Even though you've not finished your preservation degree or may not for a year or more, I think it's still possible.
That's correct. So if you have, let's say, a baccalaureate degree in one of those areas, with 2 years experience, you would be able to qualify.
Thank you for clarifying.
Sure. Any other questions, comments?
And just because I'll just note too, because I did notice at least a couple of names who may have applied for positions with us in the past, even though we may have resumes and applications and kind of know of you in that way from prior attempts, you still will have to do this. You definitely apply through the civil service exam and get on the list that way. Don't just assume that because you've done it before that you're already on some sort of list, or that because we already may know who you are from those past applications. So please make sure to apply again through the channels that Stephanie described.
Yeah, and I think it's good to keep an eye on when it's offered. We wanted to make sure people knew about it this year because it's being offered. And if it doesn't fall into the right time based on your current degree level, I would say keep an eye on it. And it's also not that we don't hire people unless there's a list. We do hire people, but then those people will be provisional until the next exam that's offered. So we have some staff right now who will be taking the exam to be made permanent.
What I should have mentioned is that civil service makes it difficult for us to hire from, the public when there's a list. We're not able to do that by law. So we can only hire from the public when the list is exhausted, which happened last year.
Well, I guess if no one has more questions, we can share these links. I guess we can we'll follow up in the emails that we sent to each of the schools and just provide any follow-up information, and then our contact info. So if you have questions, you could get in touch with any of us.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.